Probably since time immemorial, humanity has believed in some higher power or another, usually as a rationale for things they did not understand. Religions and deities have come and gone, whether real or imagined, but there was a purge with the rise of the emperor that saw all worship outlawed. It was a failed attempt, however, as cults sprung up throughout the nascent Imperium, and in modern times, one of them has risen to become the official religion despite the secular desires of the Lord of Mankind. Its reach is long, encompassing military organizations and organizing its own wars, as well as propagating its faith. And though its doctrine varies slightly across the galaxy, its persecution of heresy is brutal and swift. Led from Terra with a permanent seat in the Senatorum Imperialis, its temples are found on most, if not all, Imperial worlds to spread the word of the God Emperor, deified since his internment on the Golden Throne. Led by an individual known as the Ecclesiarchy from their continent-spanning palace, it was originally known as the Temple of the Saviour Emperor. It is now known officially as the Adeptus Ministorum, though commonly it is referred to as the Ecclesiarchy, and this is its story along with information on its workings. My name is Michael for Tactica, Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. The cult that would become the Ecclesiarchy was founded in the Great Crusade along with many others, well, probably, though drawing a line from its beginning to its dominance is a little difficult in places. Following the Unification Wars, the Emperor outlawed religion and made the new Imperium a secular state. It is thought that this was an attempt to starve or weaken the Chaos Gods in some way before he would finally cut humanity off from the warp and its corrupting influence. However, whilst on the surface this decree was followed, many cults went underground. Some likely continued their old ways, but a new breed of worship also sprung up. These cults did not worship Chaos or any of the other deities worshipped by humans over the millennia. Instead, they worshipped the Emperor himself as a divine being. The most open and obvious of these groups was none other than the now traitorous word-bearers Astartes Legion and their Primarch Lorgar Aurelian, who penned a mighty tome known as the Lectitio Divinitatis that flat out called the Emperor a god. The word-bearers would spread this doctrine to every world they conquered in the Great Crusade, but as the Imperium was supposed to be secular, the worship was often done in secret, forming an underground cult network in a way. The believers in the Lectitio Divinitatis were numerous, and the most famous figure amongst them, other than the Astartes, was the Remembrancer Euphrati Keeler, attached to Horus Lupercal's 63rd Expedition Fleet, where the cult was at its most prevalent. It should be noted, however, that Horus was completely against the idea, even before his corruption. Even Astartes outside of the word-bearers eventually came on board, such as the Death Guard / Knight Errant Nathaniel Darrow, and Keeler would eventually become recognized as perhaps the first of the Imperial saints, or maybe living saints, I can't exactly define it well. When the Horus heresy ended and the Emperor was interred upon the Golden Throne, the number of cults worshipping him multiplied massively, even on worlds one might deem civilized as opposed to the primitive ones who had worshipped the Emperor even without the word-bearers around. The largest and strongest of these was based on Terra, led by a former Imperial army officer who had renamed himself Vatidicis. His original identity is sadly unknown, though we know he fought in the battle for the Imperial Palace. It was called the Temple of the Saviour Emperor, but we cannot be certain whether this was a faction that believed in Lectitio Divinitatis or whether it was a variant faith. I suspect the former since Keeler is still a saint, but I cannot guarantee it. It grew to over 1 billion members on Terra alone, spreading across Segmentum Solar and swallowing up any of the smaller cults in its way. It got to the point that by the beginning of M32, so about 1,000 years post-heresy, 2/3 of the Imperium was thought to be part of the Temple, and it was adopted as the official religion of the Imperium, with the Imperial cult replacing the Imperial truth that the now deified Emperor had propagated during his life. The Temple of the Saviour Emperor was no more, and in its place stood the Adeptus Ministorum, better known as the Ecclesiarchy. By this time, there were very few true rivals to the Ecclesiarchy, but there was one, the Confederation of Light, based out of the world of Dimamar in Segmentum Obscurus. It promoted the worship of the Emperor, of course, but it encouraged a humble life of poverty for its members, using the Emperor's self-sacrifice as an example to all, whilst the Ministorum's cardinals would live in luxury and its shrines were ornate and extravagant. I somehow doubt the Confederation could have ever overthrown the Ecclesiarchy alone due to sheer size, but the Ministorum weren't going to risk that and called the first of the Wars of Faith. Unlike the Senatorum Imperialis approved crusades, the Wars of Faith are called and often prosecuted entirely by the Ecclesiarchy, or at least they control it, both selfishly for material gain and spiritually for the destruction of the God Emperor's foes. The one against the now heretical Confederation of Light was a massive success, shattering it into tiny cells that would not be seen again for millennia, cementing the authority and dominance of the Adeptus Ministorum. Almost all of humanity would fall under their banner and accept their faith, with notable exceptions. The Adeptus Mechanicus and its unique belief in the Omnissiah was left alone, as were the Adeptus Astartes, who often at least partially believe in the old Imperial truth, and refuse to accept the Emperor as a god to follow his wishes. The main reason for this deviance being allowed, I suspect, was simple pragmatism. Without the Astartes, the Imperium would lose much of its military strength, and the forge worlds of the Mechanicus were and still are vital to humanity's survival. As a result, the Ministorum probably just knew better than to risk conflict with the other Imperial factions, leaving them to it, though I believe they have fought on various issues over the years, even if some Astartes such as the Black Templars did actually accept the Imperial cult. The Ecclesiarchy only grew in power over the next few millennia, especially on Terra and amongst the High Lords. Great cathedrals were built on every civilized world, and the ecclesiarchal bank balance only grew and grew, with the various wars of faith contributing massively. The Ecclesiarch had actually been a member of the Senatorum Imperialis since apparently M31, though I cannot be sure of this since it wasn't official until M32, and before long this seat was made permanent as opposed to being temporary, like 3 of the 12 seats are today. This permanence has only been revoked once, and actually saw the Ministorum completely removed from the High Lords for a time. Ecclesiarch Mesring lost his sanity during the War of the Beast, wanting to welcome the Orc Warlord as humanity's new god, and though he was denounced by the rest of the Ecclesiarchy, Lord Commander Kurland revoked their privileges after killing the Mad Ecclesiarch. To be fair, they weren't out the Senatorum for long. When he rebuilt after the beheading, Draken Vangerich of the Assassinorum reinstated the Ecclesiarch in his puppet cabinet, and even when the Grand Master of Assassins was dethroned, the Ministorum kept their seat and have never lost it since. The power of the Ecclesiarchy continued to flourish from there. By M34 their dominance was almost total, and they were even beginning to influence matters outside of their domain, such as military resources and laws. It got to the point that the Administratum, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and others took steps to undermine the Ministorum and wrest power back, with a measure of success. The problems never really went away though, merely they manifested in other ways. The ties the Ecclesiarchy demanded to fund its exorbitant spending, as well as the development of its own personal armies and fleets known as the Fraterus Templar, caused a wave of unrest within the Imperium. Despite deploying the Officio Assassinorum to try and remove the dissenters, the Ecclesiarchy was forced to deploy these new armed forces to put the rebellions down, and a series of invasions and warp storms further destabilized the already rebellious Imperium. It came to a head in M36 when the Administratum's leader, High Lord Goj Van Dyer, effectively launched a coup and took control of the Ecclesiarchy by executing the Ecclesiarch of the time as a heretic. Thus began a period known as the Reign of Blood, part of the wider Age of Apostasy, which saw the Mad Van Dyer run the Imperium as an insane tyrant. Incredible atrocities were carried out willingly by the Imperial factions under the new Ecclesiarch's sway, cementing his hold on every planet he could. As with the adoption of the Imperial Creed, the Astartes and Mechanicus were left alone, but they in turn gave free rein to Van Dyer everywhere outside of their own domains. During this time, Van Dyer would also learn of an all-female cult on the world of San Lior, known as the Daughters of the Emperor, and he travelled there to recruit them as his own personal guard. He proved his faith by letting himself be shot by a member of his entourage, only for the blast to be dissipated and Van Dyer to be unharmed. Unbeknownst to the seemingly backward Daughters, he was wearing a Rosarius which deflected the shot with its powerful energy fields, a technology the Daughters had never come across. Having cheated his way to a personal guard, now renamed as the Brides of the Emperor, Van Dyer would rule the Imperium for another 70 years until a rival finally emerged to challenge him. This individual was Sebastian Thor, leader of the rebuilt Confederation of Light on Dimmermar. Remember those guys from M32? Yep, they're back. It is thought that Thor was a simple preacher on Dimmermar who convinced his congregation to turn on Van Dyer, and the Confederation of Light spread rapidly across Segmentum Obscurus, only held in check on many worlds by the Fraterus Templar. Van Dyer got either worried or angry enough to send the elite of the Ecclesiarchy's armies to crush Dimmermar and the Confederation, but they were caught and destroyed in a massive warp storm that formed around their base system of clacks and that rages to this day. Due to the timing of the storm and its importance for saving Thor, it is known as the Storm of the Emperor's Wrath, believed created by the Lord of Mankind to ensure the fall of the false prophet Van Dyer, or something like that anyway. With the Frateris Templar out of the way, the Confederation was able to expand to a massive size, eventually launching a crusade of its own toward Terra. Many Imperial forces joined them too, including the Independent Mechanicus and Astartes, as well as the Pater Nova of the Navis Nobilite, and Vandaia was forced to dissolve the Senatorium Imperialis and execute many of his men to maintain order. The Ecclesiarchal Palace on Terra, and perhaps even the Imperial Palace itself, were finally brought under siege by the Confederation and its allies, but the now much larger brides of the Emperor were still fanatically loyal to Vandaia and were holding the line at least for a time. Vandaia would actually not be undone from without, but rather from within. After meeting with the Astartes in the Imperial Palace, members of the Adeptus Custodes infiltrated Vandaia's inner sanctum and spoke to the brides of the Emperor and their leader Alicia Dominica. A centurion took her, leaving the rest of his men as hostages, to what is believed to have been the Golden Throne itself. What transpired there is also unknown, but on her return, Dominica was convinced of Vandaia's treachery and executed him, ending the Reign of Blood. Though it would be several years, things would eventually calm down with Vandaia's death. Thor was made Ecclesiarch, the Frateris Templar was disbanded, and the Holy Synod was created along with the secondary Synod Ministra. These two councils, one on Terra and one on the cardinal world Ophelia 7, would ensure that there would be no repeat of the Reign of Blood, preventing an ecclesiarch or external individual having total dominance over the Adeptus Ministorum. The Reign of Blood was also to some the end of the Age of Apostasy, but a second event is also considered as part of it, the Plague of Unbelief a few decades after Thor's ascension to Ecclesiarch. Cardinal Bucharest of the cardinal world Gethalamor denounced the Imperium, and rather like Vandaia took control of an empire as a tyrannical ruler. The Ecclesiarchy either did not or could not move against him at the time, and he took dozens of worlds to the west of Terra before moving northward. He was cautious of the attention of major Imperial bases and of the Cadian Gate, but his expansion was zealous and would ultimately cost him. He ran into the Space Wolves and ended up launching an invasion on Fenris itself after accidentally translating into their system. If I knew what that expression meant, I would be face-palming right now. Unsurprisingly, this eventually failed and cost his Imperial Guard allies massively, and Bucharest was forced into retreat. Things would only spiral from there as more invasions failed and uprisings began, culminating in the call from a confessor Dolan Kairosius for Bucharest to resign and repent. Bucharest would put Dolan on trial and then have him tortured and executed, but in the end it was this that would bring him down. Dolan used the trial as a platform to speak and stir up the empire the cardinal had conquered, and on his death/martyrdom a mass rebellion broke out, overthrowing and massacring Bucharest and then assumedly reintegrating into the wider Imperium. It's not confirmed, but it's not said the Ecclesiarchy had to bring them back into line pretty much, so I'm just making a best guess. As befits both a state religion and an organisation of the Imperium of Man, the Ecclesiarchy is a bureaucratic juggernaut, with various rankings and subgroups all contributing in their own way. As mentioned earlier, the highest ranking group within the Adeptus Ministorum is the Holy Synod based on Terra, made up of all the various cardinals, including, one assumes, the Ecclesiarch. The Synod runs the Ecclesiarchy, discussing policy and sending one or more of its members to represent them in the Senatorium Imperialis. The position of Ecclesiarch is decided by election, but is then held unto death, for those curious. Within the Synod, there is also the Synod Ministra, based on Ophelia 7, one of the holiest and richest worlds in the Imperium after Terra and Mars. Their membership is unknown, but their purpose is to enforce the dictates of the Holy Synod, as well as act as a secondary power base, just in case the Administratum or a rogue Ecclesiarch gets above their station and tries to, for want of a better phrase, pull a Goge Vandaia. Each cardinal within the Synod controls a diocese. In the pre-Sebastian Thor days, this would potentially be hundreds of worlds, which explains how Bucharest's empire got so large in the Plague of Unbelief. But part of Thor's reforms saw these reduced to often a single world to stop cardinals becoming too powerful. Below the cardinals are various ranks of ministorum priests, each holding different but critical roles in maintaining the spiritual health of the people and the running of the diocese. The Creed Temporal and the ranks of deacon within it are the overseers of secular business such as logistics, administration, and finance. The deans are responsible for the collection of tithes, whilst the deacons will spend the funds on things like shrines, etc., all overseen by the archdeacon of that particular diocese. As for the boots on the ground, doing all the grafting and work amongst the people, there are the ministorum preachers. They are all leaders of individual shrines, and their duty is to root out heresy wherever it may be, including personally overseeing executions of those who defy the Imperial creed. They will also often lead the defense of their shrines in battle, stirring up the congregation to war with their fiery oratory. Something similar also applies to those Ministorum priests who are attached to the Imperial military. They are as inspiring in their own way as the fear-inducing commissars, and often go to war wielding massive chainswords known as eviscerators to back up their words with melee prowess. Senior preachers are known as a pontifex, overseeing the various parishes on their planet or even beyond, with variant ranks depending on the breadth of their authority. There is a pontifex for Terra, but I'm curious how he ranks compared to the other pontifices, etc. The most zealous of preachers can attain a separate rank, that of a confessor. They are free agents within a diocese, preaching with such passion that rebellious populaces can be brought around to the Ecclesiarchy's teachings, even going so far as to sell out their friends and neighbours and themselves as heretics. They can also be given special permission to gather up armies known as frateris militia, effectively an army of civilian zealots without training that are supposed to have no formal ties to the Ecclesiarchy, instead coming of their own volition to fight in a war of faith. The reason for this separation is the decree passive, implemented after the Age of Apostasy, which forbids the Adeptus Ministorum from ever having an army or fleet of its own. However, the wording of the decree forbids the Ecclesiarchy from having specifically men under arms, allowing Ecclesiarch Thor to exploit a loophole and create the Adeptus Sororitas, who are, of course, all female. We'll be discussing the Sororitas in full in the not-too-distant future, for those who are wondering. Of course, the Ministorum isn't just about creating a religious stranglehold on the worlds it controls. It's a big galaxy, and more people are always in need of enlightenment by the God Emperor. The Missionaria Galaxia, as the name may or may not suggest, is a missionary organization that travels along with any exploratory vessels or military organizations that follow the Imperial creed, such as the Black Templars. The missionaries attached to them are actually encouraged to use their own initiative, extremely rare amongst the dogmatic and traditional ecclesiarchy, learning about the customs and traditions of the worlds they're on whilst converting them, potentially over generations. They are skilled orators, perhaps even on the level of confessors, and they are one of the very few groups of diplomats within the Imperium. Of course, they're just as capable in combat and are not above calling in the Inquisition or Sororitas to drop some ultra-violence on a particularly heretical group. The final faction within the Ecclesiarchy is the Schola Progenium, orphanages run by the Ministorum's missionaries for the children of deceased Imperial officials. It is from the Schola Progenia that many members of the Commissariat and the Officio Assassinorum are drawn, as well as Sororitas members and officers in the Imperial Navy. There is a level of variance between the activity and interpretation of the Imperial Creed from world to world and system to system. You might not expect that, given how, strong and strangleholdy the Ecclesiarchy is, but this is mainly due to the scale. One only needs to look at the religious variations throughout Terra's history to see how easy it is to deviate from original strictures. Add this to the fact that missionaries will use coded prophecies, etc. to brief their successors, excuse me, and it becomes clear that the Imperial Creed will almost certainly vary across the galaxy. We don't know quite how far the Terran lot will take deviation from it without calling you a heretic. Best to play it safe, but you've got a little bit of leeway. Over the past 9 or 10,000 years, there haven't been many famous individuals within the Adeptus Ministorum, aside from the various names of the Ecclesiarchs. We've discussed Goj Van Dyer and Sebastian Thor, as well as their actions briefly already, but other notable ones include Veneris II, the first Ecclesiarch to become a High Lord of Terra, and Decius XIII, who clashed with Hereticus Inquisitor Fyodor Karamazov over the fate of a preacher on the cardinal world of Salem Proctor. Spoiler alert, Karamazov got his way. A famous cardinal, however, is a man known as Armandus Hellfire, 1L, not 2, don't worry, ruler over the diocese or world of Avignon in the northwest of the galaxy, just past the Eye of Terror. Because he works so close to what was the greatest warp rift in the galaxy, Hellfire has led many wars of faith against the corruption of chaos in his diocese, but he's no tyrant or stern ruler like you might expect. He's actually a very likeable cardinal, renowned for his wit and humour, and as a result the morale of the Frateris militia he raises is at perhaps record levels, which in its own way makes them fighters almost equivalent to the Astra Militarum despite their nature as militia troops. He's also been known to call in the cavalry as well. The Repressor, an APC utilised by the Sororitas and the Arbites, was first deployed in a military capacity by the Sisters to put down an uprising on Avignon during the Feast of the Emperor's Ascension. This is a week-long festival celebrating the Emperor's ascension to divinity, better known to those in the know as being put on the Golden Throne, which is the most common celebration in the Emperor's name held in the Imperium, and the large number of people in the streets of Avignon were incited to riot by rebels. The most famous of the confessors is undoubtedly Arch-Confessor Kirinov, a firebrand and tactician both, renowned for his purging of heresy. He is a servant to the ideals of Dolan Carosius, the confessor who helped bring an end to the Plague of Unbelief, believing that no sacrifice is too great to see a task done. Kirinov even carries around a black marble icon made from Dolan's original pulpit. He also carries a mace he recovered from the planet Valan, which he led the purge of against the Chaos Demagogue and his corrupted legions. The mace is now symbolic of the office of Arch-Confessor, so I have to wonder whether similar weapons have been issued to the others who hold that office. Perhaps most notably, Kirinov led a revolt and uprising against the corrupted governor of the planet Molov in the Ultima Segmentum. He had no imperial help in this endeavour, planning and instigating the coup over 3 years and setting the planet up as a highly efficient payer of ecclesiarchal tithes. However, I think that Kirinov was rather one-upped by our final famous face, Uriah Jacobus, protector of the faith. He was a missionary operating primarily in Segmentum Tempestus, in the region to the west of the Segmentum's main Imperial Navy base of Bacca. He must have started the job at a young age, as by the age of 50 he managed to bring a full 15 worlds into the ecclesiarchal fold, and we know that it isn't always a quick process to do that. We don't know all the planets Jacobus converted, but we do know number 9, a medieval world known as Solstice. Jacobus spent 3 years learning the ways of the local populace before beginning his conversion mission, but when he met the planet's rulers, he discovered a statue that could only be a sign of a gene-stealer cult. The missionary was able to gather an army of the rulers more aligned with his thinking, allying them against the common foe, but they were attacked by gene-stealers and the cult en masse as they gathered to fight. Undeterred, they drove on and were actually able to win out, slaying both the Genestealer Patriarch and the Magus, cutting out the heart of the cult and allowing the Imperials to drive them out in their disarray. Jacobus became something of a legend after his work on Solstice. After all, defeating a full-fledged Genestealer cult is no small feat. He didn't rest on his laurels, however, continuing his missionary work and bringing in more worlds to the Imperial cult. We'll never know how many worlds he may well have been able to convert had he lived a long, full life, as it was cut short on world number 16. The death world of Gorang would ultimately be the resting place of Uriah Jacobus, who contracted a lung-destroying virus whilst attempting to convert it. Whether someone picked up the mantle or the world finished its conversion alone, however, is more unclear. I hesitate to try and calculate how many worlds a full long-lived Jacobus could have brought in, as we do not know when he began his work, and the average lifespan of a missionary is also unknown. But I suspect he could have made it to 30 without much difficulty. Puts the Tau Watercast Gold Ambassador to shame in a way, though he was integrating Xenos as opposed to converting humans, so maybe not a fair comparison? So end the tales of the Adeptus Ministorum. The Ecclesiarchy has had a long and somewhat tumultuous history, especially during the Age of Apostasy, but like religious groups often do, it seems to have been able to shrug off the controversy, reform, and survive. It's also among the very few Imperial factions to be proactive in its work, with its missionaries going to spread the word of the God Emperor to worlds beyond its control. I have to admit, for a group that would have never been tolerated in the Emperor's time, the Ministorum has done incredibly well for itself, being one of, if not the most powerful civilian organisation in the entire Imperium of Man. Since we mentioned them here, I think next time we'll double down on the whole religion thing, and look at the militant force of the Ecclesiarchy in depth, how they came to be, their structure, and their most famous members. Thank you all for watching, my name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.